Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on climate action and energy and transport. We will now move on to the next item of business, which is a statement by Gillian Martin on offshore wind. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and therefore there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin to make her statement. Up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Offshore wind presents an era-defining opportunity to grow our green economy for the benefit of communities across Scotland, while supporting our energy security and journey towards net zero. Through our world-leading ScotWind and innovation in targeted oil and gas leasing rounds, or INTOG, Scotland's at the forefront of offshore wind development globally, with a potential project pipeline of over 40 gigawatts. This is more than 40% of the total UK pipeline, a pipeline which is one of the largest in the world. Our abundant natural resources, world-leading subsea engineering capabilities, strong skills base in oil and gas production and extensive potential pipeline of projects mean we are uniquely positioned to lead on the global charge on offshore wind and be at the heart of Europe's energy transition for decades to come. But most importantly, Scotland's offshore wind journey is about opportunity for the people of Scotland, for our communities and workforce. Opportunities for our young people just starting out in their careers, for supporting a just transition, for reinvigorating coastal communities and for growing our economy in a sustainable way. And while I acknowledge the uncertainty that global market dynamics currently bring to the offshore wind sector, including the decisions by some to pivot away from renewables, let there be no doubt that offshore wind remains one of Scotland's most significant economic opportunities and our key competitive advantage in the energy transition. Indeed, as demonstrated by several recent strategic acquisition and investment decisions by committed developers, there is a clear confidence in Scotland's offshore wind market. The Scottish public sector continues to be steadfast in our backing of the offshore wind industry. The Scottish National Investment Bank's investment in the Pentland project announced yesterday sends a clear signal to the market that floating wind is of critical importance for Scotland's energy transition, our supply chain and our economy. And it also marks the bank's and the UK National Wealth Fund's first joint investment. And our pipeline of offshore wind projects continues to turn potential into reality. For example, the Moray West and the Nartnaguy offshore wind farms became fully operational earlier this year, with a combined capacity of 1.3 gigawatts, enough to power more than 1 million homes. Also, Inch Cape offshore wind farm is now under construction, and they took me through their plans at Montrose Port the week before I launched the climate change plan, standing alongside their micropiles on the quayside at the Port of Leith. We estimate that the potential capital value of the Scottish offshore wind market could be around £100 billion, given full deployment of the potential pipeline. We are in a unique position to maximise that potential and build upon Scotland's already strong reputation as a destination for offshore wind investment. A key ingredient is our approach to leveraging wider investment. In the last 18 months alone, we have invested around £150 million in the offshore wind supply chain and ports. This is leveraging around £740 million of wider investment into 10 projects, with the potential to support around 5,000 jobs in communities across Scotland, including at Ardersier, Montrose, Scapa, Lerwick, Nigg and Kishorn. Scotland has already seen significant commitments from capital and inward investors. Development at the Ardersier port is one of the largest regeneration projects in the Highlands for decades, with potential to support around 3,000 jobs and reskilling opportunities. Forth Ports have invested £150 million in expanding offshore wind capabilities. And Sumitomo is investing £350 million in a subsea cable factory projected to support around 330 jobs over 10 years. And just last month, Mitsui and MOL announced plans for a multi-million upgrade at the Port of Nigg, and I was glad to meet with them last month. One of the most significant opportunities is in the offshore wind industry's ability to support well-paid, secure and sustainable employment for people across Scotland. As it continues to grow, the offshore wind sector is providing opportunities to those entering the job market for the first time. as well as those who want or need to change careers as part of a just transition. And last week we published Scotland's offshore wind skills priorities and action plan, developed in partnership with industry and public sector partners. And the plan sets out initial actions to be taken over the next 2 years to support the pipeline of skilled workers which will be needed by the offshore wind sector right across Scotland. And these actions build on existing work aimed at upskilling Scotland's renewable energy workforce, including the recently launched Energy Transition Skills Hub and the Oil and Gas Transition Training Fund, which is supporting our valued oil and gas workers to retrain and upskill and move into new renewable energy job opportunities. We're also working hard to ensure that we are managing the marine space in a planned way that ensures the interests of the marine environment and all marine users are properly considered, including our valued fishing sector. This is central to our considerations as we update the sectoral marine plan for offshore wind energy and work to support the delivery of strategic compensation and a Scottish Marine Recovery Fund. Presiding Officer, I am of course fully aware that where there is an opportunity to be realised, there are also challenges that need to be overcome. Current global market dynamics are bringing uncertainty, and that's exactly why this government is choosing to back the sector and to provide it with the regulatory, policy and investment stability that it needs to grow. However, action needs to be taken by others too. We continue to work closely with the UK Government on our shared ambitions around clean power to deliver economic growth, energy security and support net zero ambitions, but we need action on critical issues which are reserved to the UK. To secure project delivery in Scotland, the UK Government must prioritise the reforms necessary to make transmission charges fairer so that there is a level playing field for Scottish projects and bring forward grid connection dates. A lack of certainty on network connection dates and the unfair transmission charging regime are the most significant barriers to the delivery of Scottish offshore wind projects. This year's Contracts for Difference allocation round 7 is a pivotal moment to inject fresh momentum into Scotland's offshore wind sector and build on the strategic investments made in our supply chain to date. And I've been clear in my ask of the UK Government that the final budget for the allocation round 7 must facilitate the deployment of both fixed and floating offshore wind projects in Scotland, while ultimately keeping prices affordable for consumers. Let us be clear, an underfunded auction would jeopardise the delivery of Scotland's offshore wind pipeline, undermine investor confidence and risk pushing investment and jobs towards other markets, jobs that are of critical importance, not least to those in the North East. We will continue to work constructively with the UK Government and other partners to ensure that Scotland's offshore wind sector reaches its full potential, because we all need to play our part. It's imperative that all of us, as Scotland's elected representatives, advocate for the sector, given the size of the prize for our economy, energy security and net zero. And in doing so, we'll reinforce to investors that Scotland is a prime destination for investing in offshore wind projects, supply chain and infrastructure. Presiding Officer, in closing, offshore wind is not just an energy solution, it's a huge economic and social opportunity for the people of Scotland. And whilst I acknowledge there are challenges to be overcome, the fact remains that Scotland is seen globally as a country that is leading the way which others can learn from, a country that is doing everything within its power to deliver the benefits that our tremendous potential pipeline of offshore wind projects represents, in a way that ensures environmental impact and the interests of all marine users are properly considered. A country that is working hard to deliver sustainable opportunities for our supply chain, which translate into good quality, well-paid jobs for the people of Scotland and support prosperous, sustainable communities. The opportunity before us all is vast. Let's continue working together to seize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if those members who would wish to seek to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Douglas Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. But it seems rather tone-deaf of the Cabinet Secretary coming here talking about the jobs of tomorrow, when jobs of today are being lost at Musmoran and right across the North Sea oil and gas sector, with a presumption against new oil and gas. However, North East fishermen will be dismayed to hear that this government wants to sell our fishing communities down the river yet again, given this announcement. With it, this government is sticking 2 fish fingers up to our fishermen. The scale of these projects are massive, and each and every time a new project is consented, it severely restricts where our fishermen can fish. And what fishermen are asking for is simple: protection from reckless spatial squeeze, recognition that fishing must remain an integral part of Scotland's future, and a moratorium on new offshore wind until the full impact of our fishing grounds is fully understood. So will the Cabinet Secretary urgently get round the table with our fishermen to ensure that they are not sacrificed on this government's ideological pursuit of net zero, and also instruct developers to engage constructively with our fishermen to ensure that they are properly compensated for their loss of fishing grounds?
Cabinet Secretary.
If I have an ideological pursuit of anything, it's about prosperity and the economic growth for the people of Scotland. And I think it's a little bit strange that an energy spokesperson from another party who would like to be stood where I am right now would completely and utterly miscall a huge part of that energy sector and not give it its support. I think it's astonishing that someone who represents the North East and wants to continue to represent the North East would say to the people of that area that he is not interested in the future of the North Sea with regard to floating offshore wind or offshore wind.
Mr Lumsden,
it is
please allow
a
the Cabinet Secretary
very strange tack, but I'm not in the business of giving political advice to Douglas Lumsden. What I will say is that I meet with representatives from the fishing industry regularly. I meet with Elspeth MacDonald from the Scottish Fishermen's Federation regularly. I saw her this week, in fact, albeit it was on an informal basis. We have a fundamental role to play in managing the marine space. We're clear that the expansion of offshore wind must be achieved sustainably with a consideration of other industries. The sectoral marine plan, which we're currently updating in consultation with all interested parties, is underpinned by comprehensive impact assessments that identify opportunities. Presiding Officer, it's very difficult to deliver the answer
Cabinet
that a
Secretary,
member
please resume.
wants.
Yes, I get that. Please resume your seat for a second. I am a bit weary of all the sedentary kind of chit-chat going on. When a member has the floor, that is the member whose voice we want to hear. We don't want to hear any other voice. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you for that, Presiding Officer. The sectoral marine plan is underpinned by comprehensive impact assessments that identify opportunities and constraints for development. These assessments are informed by the latest scientific evidence and extensive stakeholder engagement, including that from the fishing sector.
I call Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance notice of her statement. Cabinet Secretary, Shell returned their campaign lease to Crown Estate Scotland. Is the Cabinet Secretary worried that other leaseholders are considering handing back their licences? And what is the Cabinet Secretary going to do to develop confidence in offshore wind, in supply chains and promote new manufacturing? The Cabinet Secretary referenced the Pentland project with investment from GB Energy, National Wealth Fund and the Scottish National Investment Bank, each with the option to invest up to £50 million. Does the Scottish Government have a plan to ensure that we're going to see more of this funding to get training opportunities, create permanent jobs and investment? And feedback from the renewable sector is that speeding up planning decisions is crucial to build investment confidence, so we get the manufacturing investment in Scotland rather than importing renewables components. For example, manufacturing renewables components at the Port of Leith. That would be a huge opportunity. So what's the Scottish Government doing to deliver on this ask, and when are we going to see the energy strategy and just transition plan?
Cabinet Secretary.
I was going to really praise Sarah Boyack for being a spokesperson that understands the economic value of what we've been trying to do. And this is obviously something that her government down in London have a strong record since they came into government and champion, along with the Scottish Government as well. And it is one of the areas of agreement that we have largely. Where we don't have agreement is on the impact of the Energy Profits Levy in terms of giving that confidence. The Energy Profits Levy, there is actually a very, very interesting piece of work that's been done by Oil and Gas UK, which has actually put a proposal to the UK Government, which has set out how they can actually get more funds going into the Treasury as a result of a reformed EPL. And I really hope that both the Scottish Labour have looked at their proposals, but also are advocating for those proposals to be taken forward in the budget, because that is the single biggest thing that people from offshore wind and other energy companies are telling me that is the blocker to investment. However, I am still hugely confident that we will see ScotWind projects develop. Obviously, Shell has taken a different decision. Shell has taken a decision which has actually more generally pivoted away from renewables projects because they want to concentrate their operations on oil and gas. And I say that that's highly regrettable. But I had a call after that decision was made with Crown Estate Scotland around that. And they are very confident that they have told me there is interest in that licence and having new tenants for that licence, which I think is hugely encouraging. They actually told me that that particular area was one of the most sought-after areas in the ScotWind round. And so, apart from reaching out to people who were to organisations that were interested in the first round of licence auctions, they have said there's actually been contact from interested partners as well. I have mentioned some of and Sarah Boyack also mentioned some of the projects that are progressing, and indeed,
Cabinet Secretary, I would ask for a wee bit more of a succinct approach to, because otherwise we're not going to get through all the members that wish to. Thank you. So as I say, we have a bit of time in hand, but I do have quite a bit of interest. So I call Michael Matheson to be followed by Tim Eagle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary aware that over half of the ScotWind projects are floating offshore wind projects. And given the technological challenges within this particular sector, it's essential that to support its deployment, that we attract the blade and the cell manufacturing for floating offshore wind here to Scotland. Given Mingyang's proposals for an integrated offshore wind production facility in Scotland, can Cabinet Secretary set out what engagement the Scottish Government has had with the company to support this investment, and also whether they will engage with the UK Government to ensure that decisions are made in support of this proposal at pace in order to allow this investment to go ahead?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Michael Matheson for that. We welcome Mingyang's smart energy proposals for the £1.5 billion investment in a new turbine manufacturing facility at Ardsley Port. And over myself and the Deputy First Minister have been making representations in support of that, and exactly the kind of cross-government deliberations that you would expect. I wanted to also raise something about the supply chain. It's not just the offshore wind supply chain that is going to yield a great amount of economic activity for Scotland, and that's where the real prize, and I've outlined in my statement how much I think is associated with offshore wind. But these cable manufacturers that we're attracting to Scotland also should be considered when it comes to the transmission cabling that's required as well, because that's been done right now. I wrote to the Secretary of State on net zero about the fact that there is that NISO has no local procurement conditions around transmission cabling. That would provide a great deal of comfort to those that are willing to base themselves on investment in Scotland and give them additional orders which would actually turbocharge their investments and indeed create that economic value locally.
I call Tim Eagle to be followed by Paul McLennan.
Bring this back to the voice of local people. A few weeks ago, I asked at First Minister's Questions how local people could engage on the proposed Murray Flow Park plans. Last week, 600 people crammed into Universal Hall in Findhorn and Nairn Community Centre to put their views across. Now, Murray Sampson of Murray Firth Windsports asked a question that I think is relevant not just to this project, but many. Can we bring it back to basics, he said. Look at Nairn, Findhorn, Berghead. Look at the beauty. Is there anywhere Crown Estate just look at and say, no way? Well, today I bring the voice of far more than those 600 people who were in the room with me last week, but fishermen and communities who don't feel listened to. So just like Murray's question, does the Cabinet Secretary ever hear the concerns of local people and just say, no way?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think anybody in my position, whether it would be Labour, SNP, Conservative, as an Energy Secretary, would adhere to the processes that are set in law, both by the UK Government legislation and Scottish legislation, around anything to do with planning. This particular development that Mr Eagle references, the Murray Firth Flow Park, no marine licence applications have been submitted, and I believe that the project remains at a very early stage. There are exploratory surveys being undertaken by the developer, I believe, and of course the developer is encouraged to engage with stakeholders and the local community. That is the very least that we should expect. Until an application comes in, I won't be able to be in receipt of all their plans, and indeed the consenting around this development will have to be undertaken in a very thorough and rigorous way. I don't think anybody standing in my position, of whatever party stripe, would, without any knowledge of a development or any of those applications or any of those impact assessments, make a judgment on a project, whether that be something that is based in the marine environment or terrestrially.
I call Paul McLennan to be followed by Mercedes Verba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Nartnagoia, Inchcape and Berwick Bank either come on shore or will come on shore in my constituency in East Lothian. The Cabinet Secretary recently visited Hadfab in my constituency to highlight successful contract awards. Hadfab are a successful fabrication company in East Lothian, employing many local people and local apprentices. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what more can be done to grow local supply chains in all tiers of procurement through offshore wind farm development?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Paul McLennan for that question, and obviously the time that I was at Hadfab, where Paul McLennan was there, Martin Whitfield and the former Secretary of State of Scotland, was to celebrate a contract that they had won for more manufacturing. But I was actually there previously to meet with the many apprentices that they had. And I was completely and utterly blown away by their enthusiasm for the fact that manufacturing was happening in their locality, and they effectively would have jobs for the rest of their life. In terms of what Paul McLennan is saying about making sure that we have more manufacturing in Scotland, obviously we've got 500 million invested in the supply chain across 5 years for offshore wind and the development of supply chains, and indeed the pivoting of existing supply chains, because one of the USP that Scotland has is that we have a very vibrant energy supply chain already. At the moment, with order books that are largely oil and gas for many of them, but pivoting towards renewable opportunities, and they will be pivoting back and forth for years to come. So obviously, as part of Scotland licensing obligations, that there has to be a local procurement associated with that. I think that was a smart thing to do. I'd like to see that for transmission infrastructure as well.
I call Mercedes Verba to be followed by Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. Continued uncertainty and chaotic decision-making from private offshore renewable developers is harming workers and communities in the North East region. The mismanagement of UK oil and gas revenues by the privatised fossil fuel industry means workers now face an unsure and unjust transition. It's critical we do not repeat the same mistakes with offshore renewable energy. In the Future Economy Scotland report, Rethinking ScotWind, Maximising Scotland's Offshore Wind Potential, one of the key recommendations was for the Scottish Government to explore taking public equity stakes in offshore leasing and development. So does the Minister recognise the considerable long-term benefits that upfront investment from the Scottish Government would bring to renewables development, and will she ensure that it is the people of Scotland who benefit from our common natural resources?
Cabinet Secretary.
Very little to disagree with Mercedes Verba in her question there, and a lot of what she says I absolutely stand behind. I think that certainly, obviously, ScotWind licences are out there, but there is opportunity in other areas as licences may go forward for other projects in the future, whether they be onshore or offshore, for governments to be taking a stake in them. I think that that's the right thing to do. I would also point to the fact that more recently in the onshore position, I have made sure that local communities have first option on repowering opportunities for offshore wind farms owned on the estate of Forestry Land Scotland. So I very much had that ethos in mind. I think that if this is going to be a just transition, then the wealth associated with the generation of energy should come to the people of Scotland who are hosting all the infrastructure. And it shouldn't just be in the form of community benefits, it should actually be equity stakes as well. And I actually really fundamentally think that developers should not wait for any kind of legislation in that. I think they should be offering opportunities for communities to benefit from the funds that they generate as a result of production. They don't have to wait for government to tell them to do that. Is it the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to get people on side for your development? Yeah, I would say it's a smart thing to do.
There are still a number of members who have pressed, and I would wish to take all of them, but I would need more succinct questions and more succinct answers. I call Audrey Nicholl, to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ensuring that we retain the workers and the skills for the green energy transition is absolutely integral to the success of new projects. Yet the Chief Executive of Flotation Energy warned only this week that the UK Government's Energy Profits Levy was, and I quote, wiping out 1,000 oil and gas jobs a month, losing many of the workers whose skills are needed for renewable projects. So does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns that Labour's energy policies are continuing to jeopardise Scotland's just transition?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would actually go further than that. I would say, well, Labour's energy policy with regard to the EPL isn't just Labour's energy policy, it's also the Conservatives' energy policy that they had in place, and they are completely and utterly turning their backs on taking responsibility for that. I mentioned in portfolio questions earlier that OE UK have worked across the sector to put together a proposal to the UK Government that would actually generate more funds for the Treasury, but would also make investment in projects and indeed investment in decommissioning of projects more viable for oil and gas companies. And let's face it, the oil and gas companies, many of the oil and gas companies that we're talking about, with notable exceptions, many of them are also investing in ScotWind projects as well. So I share those concerns. It is having a knock-on effect. The EPL is disproportionate. It feels to me like a tax on the North East, because it's the North East jobs that are being taken away. And everybody who's talked about the job losses is absolutely right in that. It was supposed to be a temporary measure. The upcoming UK budget, there is an opportunity to unlock investment and certainty in whole energy. I really hope that Rachel Reeves takes the offer of OE UK. It is a sensible and very carefully worked out offer, and I urge her to read it.
Thank you. I make another plea for more succinct answers, Cabinet Secretary. I call Patrick Harvey to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Only those who want to rip up the Climate Change Act and drag us back to the 20th century would fail to recognise the incredibly powerful role that offshore wind could play. But we are in danger of repeating a missed opportunity from the development of onshore wind. Unlike some European countries which have managed to ensure a high proportion of public and community ownership of onshore wind, Scotland's community ownership is marginal. How does the Scottish Government intend to ensure that we don't repeat that missed opportunity, and instead of merely asking the developers to make a voluntary contribution to community benefit, how do we intend to lock in public ownership and community ownership?
Cabinet Secretary.
So a number of things. I've asked to be succinct. We've obviously got the Community Renewable Energy Scheme Scotland, which we've actually put additional money into as well, so that we can actually meet the demand that's out there for ownership of renewable energy. I mentioned to Mercedes Villalba that repowering opportunities, I'm giving first options to community groups that want to take those options as well. But Patrick Harvey makes a very good point about where the powers lie for mandating community benefits, which could include community ownership or indeed part ownership. They lie with the UK Government. I am pleased to say that where the Tories turned their back on communities and did not take that option when they had the powers, the current Government...
Mr Lumsden. Cabinet Secretary,
the current Government at least are consulting on it. I'm hopeful that the results of that consultation will say that what the Scottish Government has been saying for years is that communities must have more tangible benefits.
Liam MacArthur, be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you. When my colleague Jamie Green asked for this statement last week, it followed news of Shell's handing back of its lease. I don't disagree at all with the Cabinet Secretary about the importance of ScotWind, not least in terms of the economic potential it has for our country. But that decision is a concern. So I asked the Cabinet Secretary what discussions have been had with Shell about the basis for that decision, and what discussions have been had with other winners of other leases to see whether or not the concerns that Shell clearly have are felt more widely, and what action the Government would take on the back of that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Discussions with Shell, and Shell has made it clear in recent months that they are pivoting their business towards oil and gas. I think that's extremely regrettable. It's not for me to give them advice on commercial decisions. It's a decision that they have made. I think it's an unfortunate decision, but I don't think it can take away from the fact that we have a great deal of other developers that are pressing on with their developers as well. And Liam MacArthur will have heard me say that I very quickly had discussions with Crown Estate Scotland, and they were able to tell me that they've already got interest in the campaign space. I mentioned in previous answers that the campaign, the area, the licensable area, was one of the most sought after in the initial round. So I have complete confidence that other companies that have not pivoted away from their renewable ambitions will be looking towards that as being an option to take now that Shell have released their licence back to Crown Estate. I call Bob Dorsey, followed by Tess White.
Presiding Officer, the recent Pentland offshore wind farm investment announcement clearly highlights the huge economic opportunities of pursuing net zero. Given the huge number of jobs that this will support, over 1,000, and the substantial contribution it will make to our economy and energy supply, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that Pentland also well illustrates the opportunity to secure a strong, just transition, and might related investment opportunities be put at risk by those who would talk down our net zero ambitions, including some in this place?
Cabinet Secretary.
Bob Doris makes a very succinct point, in the same way that Patrick Harvey does, in the same way that Sarah Boyack does, in the same way that Liam MacArthur does, is that offshore renewables are the future economic growth opportunities for Scotland. Those that sit here and give out misinformation about it or don't stand and support that are not supporting future jobs in Scotland. I agree the energy transition will deliver jobs, growth, energy security, talking down this huge opportunity, risk delay in action. I am delighted that those who talk down this opportunity in this Parliament are in a very, very small minority.
I call Tess White to be followed by David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary talks about the size of the prize in her statement, but the fact is that the fixed costs of renewables are still massively subsidised, with huge cost passed to the consumer, and Seagreen alone has earned £48 million with no output, not a single output. Will the Cabinet Secretary assure us that developers who are in receipt of public money actually do produce energy for public consumption?
Cabinet Secretary.
There's another individual who can't get behind the renewables industry and realise the economic opportunities that it has for Scotland. Green electricity, and as a fact, is
Cabinet
the
Secretary,
cheapest.
please resume your seat for a second. I have said already about my weariness with the constant barracking from sedentary positions coming from this side of the chamber. It is neither courteous nor respectful, Cabinet Secretary.
Green electricity, the electricity that is produced by renewables, is the cheapest form of electricity. Now, there are issues about the transmission charges, and there are issues about the TNUOS charges, which I have obviously, and the contracts for difference, which I have mentioned already, that we've asked the UK Government to look at, and indeed we want to make sure that in the auction round there are favourable terms. But I would say that we do need a rebalancing of the electricity price versus the gas price, because without that it is going to become difficult for us to decarbonise. That's something that I have been advocating and my predecessors have been advocating for some time. It's something that desperately, seriously needs to be looked at, and I know that I have a great deal of support in that regard from many out with and inside this chamber.
I call David Torrance to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is very welcome that more than 1,000 jobs are expected to be created and supported throughout the construction and operation of the Pentland offshore wind farm. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise how the Scottish Government is investing in Scotland's skill base to ensure that the people of Scotland continue to benefit from jobs for the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
I am happy to do that. More than £120 million has been invested in the North East through the Just Transition Fund, the Energy Transition Fund to support the region's transition to net zero. The offshore wind industry obviously has the potential to create thousands of well-paid jobs. I mentioned in my statement that we published Scotland's offshore wind skills priorities and action plan last week, and of course David Torrance will have seen that the First Minister opened the Energy Transition Skills Hub, and indeed that went down very well in my home city of Aberdeen, where we are seeing a great deal of demand for training, not just from young people that want to come into the industry, but those who want to transition out of other areas of work.
I call Graham Simpson, followed by Maurice Golden.
Thank you. Households and businesses are already struggling with high energy bills, and offshore wind projects come with enormous costs. So what assessment has the Scottish Government made of the impact on consumers of replacing affordable oil and gas with expensive and heavily subsidised offshore wind?
Cabinet Secretary.
Offshore wind might be subsidised at the moment, but it has the potential to be probably our greatest chance at energy security that the UK as a whole will ever have. And I think it's a bit strange to talk about subsidy and not mention nuclear, which is the most heavily subsidised form of energy in the whole of the UK as well. So I think I'll just leave it there, Presiding Officer.
And I call Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. A 40 gigawatt of potential project pipeline is both welcome and massive, a fantastic opportunity, particularly once you add in the development in the rest of the UK. Now, 35% of embodied carbon is saved if new turbines are manufactured using recycled content, and 95% of turbines can be recycled. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to supporting the creation of a decommissioning hub here in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
I want to thank Maurice Golden for being one of the more sensible voices in energy in the Conservative Party. I don't know whether that will embarrass him or delight him, but certainly he has pointed to another economic opportunity that there is there. Actually, as part of our onshore wind sector deal, that we actually committed to be working with the sector on blade remanufacturing as well. I would be happy to speak to Maurice Golden about any such projects that he thinks would be worthwhile. This sounds eminently sensible and another area of economic opportunity for Scotland. I thank him for that.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the statement. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.